Welcome to the Women Leaders Association Daily Member Podcast, where we believe we go further, faster, and have more fun when we go together. I'm your host, Julianne Kirkland. And in each Daily Member Podcast, we will pick out a great speaker from one of our meetings that we thought you would enjoy. You can access hundreds of recent speakers, book summaries, great articles, and more at no additional charge through your membership portal. If you would like to get involved in a Women Leaders Association mastermind group or find a networking group near you, or if you just need access to the membership portal, simply go to womenleaderspodcast.com to be connected. Now let's tune in for this incredible message.
Hello, everybody. I'm Andrea McLean. I have been a registered nurse for 17 years now. I started off in the ICU. I still love bedside. I do help out whenever possible. I had the opportunity in 2015 to become the director of the ICU. And then in 2018, I also inherited the cath lab, which was a whole new, another experience for me. In 2020, right in the middle of COVID, I became the assistant chief nursing officer. So lots of challenges, lots of conversations that need to be had. So it's been eye-opening. I really enjoy the experience. I love challenges and I love working my way through them. So that's a little bit about me.
All right. Well, we're ready for you to share all that greatness with us. Wow. We're excited to hear from you today. And the slides are up. We are ready and the floor is all yours.
So I took the topic of handling difficult conversations with confidence. I was blessed here at Gerald Champion Regional Medical Center that they sent me to a course called Crucial Conversations, which I became an instructor for. So I actually get to teach that here at Alamogordo, which is amazing. It's helped a lot in my conversations with people. So I'm going to give you a little insight. It is a 2-day course, so I try to condense it for us and pick out the important parts for everybody. So next slide. What conversation are you going to have? And so the first part is discussing basically the conversation you need to have. Is it a behavior? Is it a pattern? Is it an accountability? So those are ones that we want to decipher between and how we're going to prepare for it. So next slide. So what are the conversations? The two most important ones I feel are setting expectations and accountability. I find it hard here when I'm listening to other leaders and stuff, and they're like, well, I got to hold this person accountable. And the first thing is, especially for new leaders, have you set your expectations? You literally can't hold your staff and other folks accountable to something they have not been clearly defined if they don't know where you're going with it. So for setting expectations, especially for new leaders, is everyone aware of the expectations? You have your organizational expectations. Since I'm in nursing, we also have department expectations. And so are those clear? And sometimes that's just a separate conversation with a person. And what we have here in our facility is an acknowledgement of discussion form. So you want to be fair with every individual. And so, but I don't want to have to keep having the same conversation over. So this acknowledgement of discussion, I sign it and the individual signs it. And that way we've discussed it. So if this is a problem that continues, now that we've discussed it, then obviously I would move into the accountability phase. Also with that, we have some folks, you'd be surprised when you sit down and have a discussion with them, a conversation that you really don't know what's going on behind the scenes for them. So that's when we develop an action plan, and you lay that out in an outline form and you hold that person to that action plan. So what I do is if I make an action plan for an individual, then I set we're going to meet weekly. And this week I want you to work on this. And so then I send an email out to them also. They also get a copy of the acknowledgement of discussion. But that way, when we meet again, they already knew the expectation. And are they improving? Because if they're not, that's a whole different conversation also. So those are little tidbits on how you're going to do it. Accountability. Now that's really just a crucial conversation. They all are. Nobody wants to have the conversation. I think we get more nervous and we're up all night wondering, oh my God, I got to have this conversation. How's it going to go? Are they going to take it right? So just being clear that they haven't, by setting your expectations, then you can hold them accountable. I've seen so many times where people are dancing around the whole clear position. No one's really said what they want to say. So you're really not clear. And it's kind of hard to hold somebody accountable. And then they end up in HR and it becomes a whole process. So, and you always have your former action plan that was also not followed that backs you up. What I always tell people and what we learned from this class is you work on yourself first. we don't realize how much we put into it and how much that helps us through it. Like, is our heart right? What am I really, by understanding what I really want, I can have a better conversation. Where do I really want this to go? Or where does the organization need it to go? And how are you going to fit in with the team? And then second is, how do I get my head right in mastering my stories and creating the emotions that will help me open up the dialogue across the table to understand what's going on. I can't get in there closed-minded. So next slide. With that, we start with getting unstuck. Whenever you are stuck, there are typically one or two crucial conversations people are either not holding or not holding well. And that's when we use CPR. I know CPR in healthcare is for something else, but in crucial conversations, it's for unbundling with CPR. And the first one's content. And with content, it's either a single instance or a consequence. And with that, it's the content is the problem. And that's what we have to realize. Next on there for P, it's pattern. And that's usually a reoccurring. If I'm talking too fast, let me know. I have a habit of doing that also, rushing through meetings. So if it's a pattern, it's a reoccurring problem. And the pattern of behavior over time is what you're noticing. And then a relationship. How is this problem affecting your work relationship? And what happens is what suffers is trust. Trust is suffering and competence is in question, which is key. And also what we've learned here lately too, is we have multi-generations in our workforce. And so how do you have conversations with different generations? Because every generation is different. We have the entitlement generation. We have our older baby boomers that work. Whatever you want them to do, they're going to do it. They'll work themselves to death. So how do we work all that together and combine it when we're having these conversations? So that's how you work on that one. Our next slide. This is just a little quote that I love, is while we are all aware of how others contribute to unhealthy conversations, we are often unaware of the ways in which we are contributing to the problem. And so that's why I tell everybody, you need to work on you first. What are you really trying to get out of this conversation? We want to retrain our brain to think, how can I make all this work together? I don't need to be right. You don't need to be right. This is better for our patients, better for the work environment. How are we going to set that standard? And so the next slide. This one is, it's myself. Change what you want and you'll change how you act. And so we have to retrain our brain. What am I behaving like I want? What do I really want? And how would I behave if I really did what? So when you have that, that's when you're trying to get their feedback, because we all work ourselves up at home to have this conversation. You already know the person you're going to talk to. You already know their behaviors. And so what are you bringing to the table in this conversation? Have you worked yourself up so bad that now you're tense and angry and it's already set that wall up that no one's getting through? So you're really not having dialogue. So that's why yourself is so important first. And the three main stories that people like to go through when you're having a conversation is differentiate between your victim stories, your villain stories, and your helpless stories. And what's key here is victim stories. It's just never their fault. They're never to blame. It's not their fault. It's everybody else's. They're innocent. The villain stories, it's always your fault. They emphasize others all the time and they like to blame and throw out labels. And then the helpless stories, there's nothing else they can do. There's nothing out there that's going to help them do everything. And that's why it's so important when you're going to have a conversation, you want to stick to facts. Facts are like a pattern. I've noticed that you've clocked in late every day this week. Let's sit down and talk about it. You have to have an open relationship of, why are you clocking in late? Maybe they don't have a babysitter that can't come in until 5 minutes later, which is making them be late. We honestly don't know what's going on in our home lives for everybody, especially these days, and babysitters and COVID and daycares being full. There's a whole bunch of issues that I find. I also have another pattern that I've noticed when I've had a conversation with somebody about clock-in times, is then all of a sudden they're not clocking in at all. Oh, Andrea, I get an email. I forgot to clock in today. So now you're not clocking in because you're late, but you want me to clock you in at this time so you're not late. So these are the tidbits you have to look for, but those are still conversations you have to have. You passing the time clock as you're walking in. I really do need you to clock in. And so sticking with the facts are more persuasive. Facts are not insulting. This is what you've actually done. It's the stories we tell ourselves that become insulting. They've worked up their own story also about how this conversation, well, as soon as you told them you're going to have a conversation, they've already worked themselves up too. So now you have two people that are butting heads instead of relaxing. And that's where you control the dialogue. And so if we go to the next, people turn two ways in a conversation. They're either going to become silent or they're going to become violent. And we've all seen this. You've seen this in meetings where somebody is domineering the meeting and the others are just off in the corner like, I'm not going to answer. I don't want to get in this. And that's unhealthy dialogue. And that's getting nobody nowhere, and we're not getting our points across. And some examples here of unhealthy motives is, I don't always need to be right. I'm looking good and I'm saving face. I need to win. I want to punish, blame, or get revenge. If you're in your work environment, you're a team. If I fail, we fail. And sometimes we forget that. And they're like, no, I'm just going to blame Joey over here. It's Joey's fault. And you're out for revenge because he forgot to add you in on the project, or you did all the work. But how do you get all these people to the table? It's not by doing this. And then you're avoiding conflict. We don't want to avoid it. We want to engage in it, but in a dialogue. We don't want to be too forceful. We don't want to say, the fact of the matter is this. Or if I agreed with you, then we both be wrong. I don't know how many times I've heard that too. Smart remark. I'm telling you, they're out there. Everybody's heard them. Healthy dialogue is learning from each other, finding the truth, finding neutral ground, producing results that we can both work with. I've always had to learn, we won't tell my husband that Andrea is not always right. At home, I'm always right. I tell my kids I'm always right. But at work, other people have amazing ideas too. And just because my idea could work, theirs can also. So that's just opening that pool of knowledge and being outside, thinking outside the box and allowing somebody else. We don't always have to do it the same way every single time. You want to strengthen your relationships with healthy dialogue. You want to be curious about what the other's bringing to the table. We want to be open-minded. Maybe it would make more sense to do it like this. You'd be surprised if you open the dialogue, more people want to contribute in the dialogue. And that's what's huge. With these stories, it's like, I'll tell you an example of a story I teach during class too. And it's because when I started off as a nurse, I was a night shift nurse. We do 12 hours, which means I work graveyard, which means I'm at home sleeping during the day. And my son had just started driving and it was spring break. So he's out cruising around in our vehicle, and I get a knock at the front door. So I always look at the side door to see who's at my front door. It's the middle of the day. People know I'm sleeping. I got 2 police officers standing out there and I'm thinking, what is going on? So I open the front door. Mind you, I'm sleeping. I have to work tonight. I got bedhead, PJs, slippers on. I look lovely. And the first thing they say is, ma'am, do you own and they list off my vehicle. I said, I do. They said, do you know where it is? I said, that's my son's vehicle. It's spring break. He's out with his friends. The first thing they told me is it was involved in a bank incident. The story I told myself is my son and his friends just robbed a bank. Absolutely untrue, but this is what we tell ourselves. You know what I mean? You come up with the story and I thought, my son just robbed a bank. These 2 officers are at the door thinking, look at his mother here sleeping in the middle of the day. It's 1:00. Nobody knows you're a registered nurse working graveyard. Nobody has any clue, but these are the stories that are unhealthy that we teach ourselves. These are the stories you've already made about your employees, the conversation you're going to have like, ooh, she's going to be all over to me today. I know she's going to jump me as soon as I bring this up. We're going to be fighting about this. We've already worked ourselves up in this frenzy that it's kind of hard to have dialogue. And that's why it's so important that we work on us first. If you can remember to stick with the facts, try not to come up with that story of your own and actually hear what their story is. It makes a huge difference because no, my son did not rob a bank, by the way, but him and his friends, one of the bank people had called in that there was some horsing around going around. So it was quite an interesting morning. Needless to say, I didn't go back to sleep. And it's a conversation me and my son have to have, another crucial one, because every time you leave this house, you represent me. And I try to tell the people at work, while you're here at work, you represent this organization. Your behaviors represent this unit. If you're breaking it down there, we can't work as a team. that way. We all have to be at the same page. And that's why the facts are absolutely so important. And that's where people struggle. The stories versus the facts. They're like, oh my God, I'm tired of this person. I need to, I'm like, rethink it. Rethink your story. Are you tired, or do we really know what's going on? Is there really a bad motive behind it? Or is there something really innocent that we can work through to fix it? And that's mainly the huge portions that we have to work through, and how we're answering in dialogue. We don't have to be right. We don't have to be vengeful. We need to work together. So our next slide, this is some huge takeaways. We are able to have any conversation, and it's true. I've come to that. I still struggle on conversations to where now that I'm assistant chief nursing officer, when I was director, I was over the staff. I went from buddy to boss. That's a whole new realm of confusion, because I used to be their buddy and now I'm their boss. And so who's going to listen to me? And so you have to set that clear expectations again when you're going through it. And then when I became assistant chief nursing officer, now the directors report to me. So that's a whole different conversation I have to have now. So when I was holding my staff accountable, that's easy. It's different facts. Now I have to hold directors accountable, because everybody fails to realize is I still have to answer to somebody else also, somebody higher than me. And when it's failing, the first thing the CEO tells me is, who's responsible for holding them accountable? That would be me. So having those conversations, they're not easy. You will stay up at night thinking about it, knowing you got to have that conversation the next day. The staff appreciate it also. I don't know how many times the staff are like, why are you here early? Or I would talk to a house supervisor and they're like, oh, Andrea, can you have that conversation in the morning when they're going off, not at the beginning of their shift? Because we're going to have to live with that person during the shift. And I said, okay, that makes sense. So then I have to move my time around when they're getting off, not at the beginning of their shift. So the rest of the team isn't influenced by their actions or if they're angry. So with this, those are the key takeaways. You have to start with you. Know what you want and how to present it. I don't know how many times I've sat in conversations. It's not the material that they're against, it's the way you're presenting it to them. And that's why your story is so important. If you've already come in defensive, they see that on you. You've got to calm it down. You've got to bring them into the dialogue that I'm not here to complain or make judgment. I'm here to help you fix it. And I'm here for you. How can I help you be better? What's missing? Did I give you the training you need? You're not going to find that. And so it's all about in the presentation. Share the facts. Facts are you can't dispute them. They're here, especially if you can print them out. Social media is a huge one these days. I don't know how many people go post on Facebook. I do not do social media, but I have my little spies here like, ooh, Andrea, and they send it to me. I print those out and I put it in there. Did you find this appropriate? Let's have that conversation when you put it out there, because social media is huge for healthcare. You may not put a patient's name on there, but just what you're saying about your department affects the whole community, especially being rural. We're a small community. We know our neighbors. We know everybody in here. We're a small area. Be mindful of your own stories on what you're telling yourself. Listen to what others have to say. That is so important. They have a lot of knowledge to bring to the table. They might be afraid. They might feel intimidated, or they just feel like everyone's not going to take me seriously. Include them in the conversation. It's hard to step back and listen to others, but I'm not always right too. I've had to learn to not chime in all the time either. Let them come up with their own conclusions instead of me bringing one to the table. I want you to come up with a solution to this problem and then come back to me next week. So people have to feel safe. And when they're choosing silence or violence, this conversation's not safe. You're going to get nowhere. No one's going to communicate. And that is you as leading this conversation or even a meeting, you have to rein everybody back in. You'll know it's safe when the dialogue starts back up. But if somebody's yelling and dominating and somebody's quiet over here, it's not a safe conversation. That's a huge continuum, and we want to be in the middle for perfect dialogue. And it's never going to be perfect. I've sat at meetings we made our entire C-suite go through this training. And now I sit in meetings and I look at everybody like, did we forget the training I put y'all through? And are we having this conversation? Is it my place, being the instructor, even though I'm not the CEO at the table, to rein everybody back in? So it's hard. It's difficult, but you have to know if you do it tactful, it'll work every single time. So our next slide, those are my huge takeaways. My next slide here is just if people can make it safe enough, they can talk to almost anyone about almost anything. And you have to remember too, if you don't feel comfortable or safe yourself, because you know this person's, it's okay to have a witness in there. You have a great HR department. They will lead you the right way. There is those times you have to have an impromptu conversation, pull a person aside, never do it in public, go to an empty room. There are those you can't just pass by, especially in healthcare and in other organizations, that you have to take care of immediately. You have those, but any other one that you know you have to have, I suggest you prepare for it. Prepare for the worst outcome and how you can rein it back in, because you know the person you're about to talk to, you know the behaviors, and then prepare for an easy one. And talk to someone about it. Practice. People hate to practice it when we're doing class, but it is so helpful. My door is always open now, and I tell people all the time, people are like, you got 5 minutes? Because I have to have a conversation and I'd like to run it through. And I'm like, absolutely, come in, because we don't want to be too direct. We want to be overbearing. We want to be able to listen. And so my door is open 100% of the time. That's why I get nothing done at work. That's why I work at home too. Work-life balance. I need that in my life. But just getting people to know that. And yes, we lose sleep. Now, if the person knows you're going to have a conversation, they're worried too. But if they don't, because you're at home prepping, you're not getting any sleep that night before. I saw something pop up on the screen. Sorry. So the next slide is, I hear this all the time. I don't know who said it. Ooh, did I miss one? This one. What you permit, you promote. If you let it slide, if you think by ignoring it, it's going to go away, it's not. And it can kill your department. It can kill your unit. It can kill the teamwork. People see it themselves. Obviously, when you're having conversations, you can't share those with everybody else, what you're doing. I've always told everybody else, because I've had people come up to me and say, what are you doing about this person? And I'm like, trust me to do my job, because there's a whole other world behind it that people don't realize unless they're in director or management positions. They don't realize what's going on behind the scenes, but they do their job too. I tell them, you should hold your coworkers accountable also. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what you want to work with, what you don't. It's teamwork. So it takes all of you, but most of the conversations you will prepare for. But if you permit it, you promote it. They will continue to do it until you nip it, you get them all on board on the same page. And usually I do that in a staff meeting. If I see something constantly going on, we're going to have a staff meeting about it. And sometimes it's an acknowledgement and discussion across the board. Now everybody's aware that we've had this conversation, but those are my huge ones. Next slide. I think that's all I got for you guys. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, this is the time, ladies, to fill the chat with any questions you have for Andrea. Man, that was a great presentation. I know I always want to be the good guy. So I definitely.
It's true.
Yeah,
it is so hard, especially those new leaders that go from buddy to boss. How do you handle the people you worked with side by side and now you're in charge of them? And so those conversations, I struggled with those, like, oh my goodness, how am I going to do this?
Yeah. I have a question here. Have you ever had a conversation that didn't go too well? If so, how did you handle it?
So I did. And so if I couldn't rein it back in, what I had to do is I had to get HR involved. And that way we're all sitting in there with a mutual person that you can hear both sides, and then we can work on it together. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of those. There's going to be a lot of pushback, but that's why I said you got to practice.
Thank you. And thank you, Denise, for that question. Sarah asks, what do you do when you know the person you had a pretty hard talking? It's pretty hard to talk to, is going to just vent and breed negativity throughout your team.
So your team's going to see that too. And that's what you put in your conversation. When you leave here, my expectation is positivity. When you're on the floor, we're promoting positivity on this unit. And that's what I want to see from you. And if you're having a write-up with them, a disciplinary action, or if it's an acknowledgement discussion, we're working on positivity this week. And so I'm going to be walking through, I'm going to ask your coworkers, how's the positivity in here? So that way they know you're expecting it from everybody. You're not singling out. That way, if it continues and the pattern continues, it's another conversation. We've had this discussion now. So now it's time for the disciplinary action. And we actually do have a policy on disruptive behavior. And I will print that out for people. It is so easy if you have a policy. Our call out policy, it's the biggest write-up I ever did as a director is call outs. How many times people call out all the time. We have a policy on it. I'm going to hold you to it. And so sometimes I think you see it at the beginning of orientation, but then you don't realize how it affects you because it's a rolling calendar year. And these call outs won't fall off until January 26th of next year if you called out today. And people need to understand that. So I pull them in, I pull in the policy, and I go over it in detail. And then if you're going to take the time to write somebody up and discipline them, give them a corrective action plan, I always give them homework. Now that I've given you this for your call outs, I want you to come up with your plan to me, and I give them a deadline, 1 week, this date, January 27th, on how you plan on improving and not calling out so much. And that way, if they miss it, I tell them it's another disciplinary action with me because now I've given you homework. Writing these people up is hard for us too, and it takes a lot of time and effort. You got to think about it, do it right, go through HR. So I always give them homework as well.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. You've provided some great information, some great tips for us today. I'm definitely going to make sure I take this back as well. Because like I said, I like to be the good guy. So hard conversations are difficult, but they're so important. So
they
important.
are.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this fantastic presentation. And we are going to, do you have any final words of wisdom for our viewers today as we transition to the next speaker?
Just don't be afraid to have them. You know, you have to have them. Your HR team will help you. They are amazing in that. My HR team's great too. Sometimes my wording on a disciplinary action compared to their wording, you know what I mean? It's talk about yourself. It's like sending an email. Don't hit send or write that email right away. Always think about it overnight before you do it. And that's why I say practice.
That's good.
Always practice, and don't just write people up, read it again, think about it. Is there something I can do to help them? Those are my huge takeaways.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
Hey, my friend, if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, be sure to rate, review, and share your biggest takeaway. And if you're wanting more, you can access hundreds of recent speakers, book summaries, great articles, and more at no additional charge through your membership portal. You can also get involved in a Women Leaders Association mastermind group or networking group near you. Or if you just need to access your membership portal, simply go to womenleaderspodcast.com to be connected. Because here at Women Leaders Association, we believe we go further, faster, and have more fun when we go together. That's all for today, my friends. Bye for now.